Welcome. You've found the quiet room. There are places in our world that connect to others, places never meant for human eyes, places that can only be found when the warnings are ignored. Please, have a seat. Tonight's tale is called Where the Old Ones Sleep. Listen closely. Duke had never believed in curses. He believed in maps, in coordinates, in stone and time and human hands. He believed that if something existed, it could be measured, cataloged, and eventually understood. That belief had carried him across continents, across deserts where the horizon shimmered like broken glass, into mountain tombs sealed for thousands of years, through sunken temples and ancient abandoned cities swallowed by sand and jungle that had tried, unsuccessfully, to erase themselves from history. That belief is how he found himself in the rainforests of Africa. The ruins did not appear on any official map. Duke learned of them through fragments, colonial expedition journals that ended abruptly, satellite images blurred by canopy, and whispered accounts from elders whose words were dismissed by historians as folklore. They lay somewhere deep within the Central African rainforest, beyond rivers that no longer had names. The people who lived near the edges of that world did not share a single name for the place. Each tribe called it something different, but the meaning was always the same: where the ancestors sleep. Duke arrived in a coastal city, heavy with heat and red dust. From there, he traveled inland, bus to truck, truck to riverboat, riverboat to foot. With every mile, the world became quieter, thicker, as though the air itself resisted movement. The warnings began gently. A customs officer frowned when Duke listed his destination on a form. "There are other ruins," the man said carefully, "better known ones." A translator he hired refused to go any further after hearing the name spoken aloud. "That place is not abandoned," she said. "It is only resting." Duke thanked them and continued. As he moved deeper inland, the warnings sharpened. Villagers stopped speaking when he approached. Elders turned their backs. One man spat on the ground when Duke asked for directions. "You should not go there," a woman told him plainly. "The forest does not like strangers." Duke smiled, reassured them, and pressed on. By the time he reached the edge of the true rainforest, the ancient, unbroken green, the people were different. Their faces bore ritual markings. They spoke languages that bent around sounds Duke couldn't replicate. Their eyes followed him with something between fear and pity. One man grabbed Duke's wrist as he passed. "Turn back," the man whispered urgently. "The old ones wake when they are disturbed." Duke gently freed himself, gave the man a smile, and continued. The rainforest swallowed him whole within the hour. It was denser than anything he'd experienced. vines thicker than cables, trees so tall their crowns vanished into mist. The air pressed against his lungs, warm and wet, buzzing with insects that seemed to whisper as they flew. The path was not a path. Roots twisted like grasping fingers. Mud swallowed his boots. Rain fell suddenly and without warning, soaking him to the bone in minutes. His equipment malfunctioned, GPS blinking, then dying. Compasses spun uselessly. At night, the forest changed. Insects fell silent. Birds disappeared. Something heavier moved through the undergrowth, slow and deliberate. Duke woke more than once to the sensation of being watched, his skin prickling as if eyes were crawling over him from the darkness. He pressed on. Every step felt contested, as though the jungle resisted him. Not violently, but persistently. A fallen tree where there hadn't been one before. A river that seemed to lengthen overnight. Paths that doubled back on themselves without warning. On the seventh day, exhausted, battered, and bleeding from countless scrapes and cuts, Duke saw stone. Massive blocks rose from the earth like bones pushing through skin. The ruins were ancient, beyond classification, older than kingdoms, older than names. The carvings depicted elongated figures with hollow eyes, neither animal nor human. At the entrance sat an old woman. Her skin was dark and deeply lined, like weathered wood. Her hair twisted into thick braids that hung down her back. She smoked from a pipe carved with symbols identical to those etched onto the stone. The smoke sank instead of rising. Duke barely looked at her. She was a native, a local caretaker, perhaps, someone who lived nearby. He tipped his head politely and stepped towards the entrance. Her voice stopped him. "You should not enter." It was calm, certain. Duke hesitated, then turned to face her. "Everyone's been telling me that," he said. "Can you explain why? They're just ruins." The woman studied him for a long moment. "Did you not notice how difficult the trip was?" she said quietly. "The people tried to stop you. The forest tried to warn you." She took a slow drag from her pipe. For the first time, a tinge of uncertainty crept into Duke's thoughts. "This is sacred ground," she continued, "where the old ones sleep." She tapped ash from the pipe. Some places were not meant for men to travel. It sounded like superstition. Duke thanked her, offered a polite farewell, and stepped towards the entrance. "You will not get another warning," she said as he crossed the threshold. A pressure passed through him, like stepping into cold water. He paused. Something felt wrong. He turned back to ask what she meant. The old woman was gone. No footsteps, no sound, no smoke. Inside, the air was cool, dry, and unnaturally still. The corridor stretched on far deeper than the structure should have allowed. Duke's flashlight illuminated carvings, figures bent in impossible poses, faces elongated, mouths frozen in silent screams. They shifted when he wasn't looking. Subtle noises followed him, Echoes that did not match his footsteps, whispers that spoke his name in voices borrowed from people he knew. His flashlight flickered, briefly revealing doorways that had not existed moments before. He turned back. No matter which direction he chose, no matter which corridor he followed or door he forced open, he could not find the entrance. Time lost its shape. There was no natural light, no markers, no rhythm. Duke could no longer tell how long he had been inside the ruins. Moments stretched and collapsed without warning, leaving him unmoored and unsure whether hours or days had passed. When he closed his eyes, massive shapes pressed against his awareness, as if something immense lay just beyond the stone, breathing slowly, patiently. Time unraveled. Corridors rearranged themselves. Staircases descended without end. Doorways appeared only to vanish when he approached. And always, somewhere in the distance, there was a sound, faint, halfway between crying and growling. Duke could not imagine that there might be another person down here, but the sound drew him forward. He followed it, clinging to the fragile hope that someone, anyone, might help him find a way out. He couldn't remember the last time he had eaten or even taken a sip of water. His vision blurred, his legs failed him, and he collapsed to his knees. Just as the edges of the world began to darken, he heard shuffling ahead. Duke lifted his head, sight swimming, and saw the shape of a figure standing in the corridor. It was tall, so tall its head nearly brushed the ceiling. He forced his eyes to focus. The figure appeared to be a man, wearing something like a loincloth. His skin was coated from head to toe in what looked like dried blood. A tribal mask covered his face, carved into an expression of permanent agony. The man was massive. The giant took a step toward Duke. The faint sounds that had been humming at the edges of Duke's awareness began to swell, rising into a cacophony of anguish that poured out from behind the massive figure as it moved closer. Duke struggled to his feet and stumbled backward. The giant advanced again. Behind it, shapes began to separate themselves from the darkness. Duke could just make them out. People, or what had once been people. Their necks bent at unnatural angles. Their faces were locked in expressions of pain and terror. Some missing limbs. Others bore wounds where flesh had been torn away, leaving bone exposed beneath. Bile rose in Duke's throat as fear spilled over. The giant lifted its head, and with a sharp flick of its chin, the figures around it surged forward. Duke turned and ran. He barreled through the corridors, boots slamming against stone, careening around corners as he searched desperately for an escape. An intersection opened before him. He skidded to a stop and looked down each passage, struggling to decide which might lead to safety. Behind him, the sound of the horde closed in. The corridor to his right sloped upward, and at its far end, Duke thought he saw a tiny pinprick of light. Light meant freedom. He ran toward it, laughter breaking through his sobs, certain, just for a moment, that he might just survive. The incline steepened as he pressed on, the stone walls narrowing until the corridor gave way to packed dirt. The sounds behind him never stopped. As he drew closer, the light grew brighter. and the hope it sparked twisted into something closer to panic. He was so close he could smell it, the wet heat of the forest just beyond the stone. By the time he reached the end of the tunnel, he was crawling on his hands and knees. Hope shattered. The opening was there, but it wasn't even wide enough for his head. Sunlight brushed his skin. He clawed at the dirt and stone, tearing at the edges, desperate to widen the hole enough to escape. Behind him, the sounds abruptly fell silent, and the sudden quiet fed his hope that the pursuit had ended. He dug frantically until the opening widened just enough for his shoulders to fit through. He forced his head through the opening, then his right arm. He drew a shaky breath, tears spilling freely now, threatening to break into a sob. As he began to pull his other arm through, something clanked around his left ankle. An iron grip, a hand, cold, massive, and unyielding. Then, teeth sank into his calf. White-hot pain tore through him as something came away. He screamed, thrashing, trying to rip his leg free, trying to drag himself up and out of the hole. The hand wrenched hard. In an instant, Duke was torn back into the tunnel, dragged away from the light and toward the waiting dark. The last fragile strands of hope snapped. This was the end. Pain swallowed him whole, and the world went black. When Duke opened his eyes, he was lying on the stone floor amid the horde. He had no sense of how much time had passed. Pain throbbed through his leg, pulsing in time with his ragged heartbeat. He pushed himself upright and looked around. The creatures no longer paid him any attention. They wandered aimlessly, drifting through the space like broken dolls, colliding and separating without purpose. At the far end of the chamber, the giant sat upon a throne of bones, the god's sentinel, watching over his flock of the dead. Behind it, carved into the wall, was a mural identical to the one Duke had seen near the entrance of the ruins. The same twisted forms, the same tormented expressions, frozen forever in stone. Understanding settled over him slowly. These had once been people. People who had ignored the warnings. People who had crossed sacred ground, believing themselves entitled. People who were now bound to this place, body and soul. This was the price of disturbing the gods. Duke laughed. The sound cracked, warped, and collapsed into sobbing. His mind began to fray. He looked down at his leg. The wound had festered, veins darkening, spreading upward beneath his skin like rot searching for purchase. His thoughts slowed, broke apart. He forgot why he had come, forgot his name, forgot there had ever been a world beyond stone and shadow. He cried until his voice failed him, and when it was gone, so was the last fragile sense of who he had been. What remained was a hollow shell, obedient, empty. Duke wandered the ruins without purpose. His skin grew pale, his movements stiff and mechanical. His eyes no longer reflected light, only carvings. Another offering to the ones who sleep. And so the ruins remain, undisturbed, unforgiving. Warnings are rarely shouted. More often, they're felt. A tightening in the chest, a pause before the next step, a voice we choose not to listen to. Much like the way you must have felt as you found your way here. You may leave the room if you like. The door is just where you remember it. I'll let you go in peace this time. But next time, well, I suppose you'll find out when you return.